the university librarian, the acting provost, College of Medicine, the dean, Faculty of Arts, deans of other faculties, the dean of postgraduate school, who is also the deputy vice chancellor academic-elect, the dean of students, the rectors of institutes and centers, heads of departments, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The 400th in the University of Ibadan Inaugural Lecture Series and the first for the 2016-2017 session will be delivered by Professor Albert Sunday Igboanusi of our Department of Linguistics and African Languages on behalf of the Faculty of Arts. Born on 27th December 1963 to Chief Emmanuel Igboanusi, Chief Emmanuel Igboanusi and Mrs. Roslyn Igboanusi of Iyete, Owerri, in all the local government area of Imo State. Albert Igboanusi attended Abo Primary School from 1970 to 1976 and the National High School, Aaron Dizogu, from 1976 to 1981. He was offered admission to study linguistics and Igbo in Imo State University, now Abia State University, in 1983. He graduated with a second-class honors, upper division, in 1987, and won an award as the best graduating student in linguistics Igbo. He participated in the mandatory National Youth Service Corps scheme between 10 September 1987 and 9 September 1988. He later registered for and obtained an MA degree in linguistics in 1991 and a PhD degree in social linguistics in 1995, both from the University of Ibadan. He had brief stints as lecturer at Osun State College of Education in Ibadan from 1992 to 1993, and the Federal College of Education Special Oyo from 1993 till 1994. Thereafter, he joined Abia State University as an assistant lecturer in 1994. He was later appointed as a lecturer grade 2 at the University of Ibadan with effect from 1st March 1996. He rose rapidly through the ranks. I never missed any of his promotions. Promoted to lecturer grade 1 with effect from 1st October 1999, senior lecturer with effect from 1st October 2002, reader with effect from 1st October 2005, attained the ultimate accolade of Professor of Linguistics with effect from 1st October 2008. Professor Igboanusi has to his credit over 60 publications, including 10 books. He has supervised 4 PhD students, with 3 more likely to complete their work in the next 2 months, as well as over 50 master's degree dissertations. Professor Igboanusi has won a number of grants and fellowships, including, but not limited to, the Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship in 1997-98, 2003, 2007, and 2014, the Fritz Thyssen Fellowship in 1999, the grant of the French Institute for Research in Africa, IFRA, in 2001, Bayokoku Postdoctoral Fellowship, awarded by the Nigerian Academy of Letters in 2002, Fellowship of the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences in 2010, and Senate Research Grant of the University of Ibadan, 2000 and 2006. He also won the Third Fund National Research Fund, awarded for the project titled A Meta-Language for HIV, AIDS, and Ebola Discourses in Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Professor Igboanusi has served as external examiner in many universities, including the University of Hong Kong, 2008, University of Ghana, Legon, 2014 till date, University of Lagos, 2007 to 2010, as well as 2014 till date, and University of Benin, 2014 to 2016. He has, amongst others, served as a visiting lecturer to some universities, including the Chemnitz University of Technology, 1997 to 1998, University of Berlin, Germany, 2003 and 2014, University of Koblenz-Landau, Germany, 2007, and University of Hong Kong, 2008, and Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, 2010 till 2011. He belongs to many professional bodies and associations, including the West African Linguistics Association, Igbo Studies Association, Society for Pidgin and Creole Linguistics, and Hong Kong Association for Applied Linguistics. Professor Igboanusi has been a consultant in mother tongue-based bilingual education for the Gambia and Sierra Leone since 2010. He has also been a consultant on LADO, that's language analysis for the determination of refugee origin, for 4 European countries since 2003. Professor Albert Igboanusi is happily married to Ijeoma Lynn Igboanusi, and the marriage is blessed with children. It's a special privilege that I am the godfather to the eldest of the children, Cindy, who was born in year 2003, when both Albert and myself were in Berlin, Germany. It's now my pleasure to call on Professor Albert Sunday Igboanusi to deliver his lecture titled The Conflicts and Politics of Language. Professor Igboanusi.
College of Medicine, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Dean of the Postgraduate School, Deans of other faculties and of students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I feel highly honored to present this inaugural lecture on behalf of the Faculty of Arts of this great university. This is the 12th inaugural lecture from the Department of Linguistics and African Languages. Therefore, it is a great privilege for me to join this class of eminent professors, including Robert Armstrong, Ayoba Mboshe, Olatunde Olatunji, Benelube, Augusta P. Omomo, Adekunle Adeniro, Kola Owolabi, Francis Eboahere, Philip Adedotu Ogundeji, Solomon Oluwole Oyesade, and Adeshola Olateji. At a time when conflicts predominate our national discourse and policymakers play politics with every aspect of our lives, I chose to dwell on the conflict and politics of language in order to highlight some of my contributions and interventions towards resolving conflict in language use. I left the southeastern part of Nigeria in 1990 in search of an ideal space to rediscover myself and define my career. My insistence on coming to the University of Ibadan for my MA degree program rather than go to the University of Nigeria Nsukka or University of Port Harcourt, where I earlier had admissions for the same program, was motivated by my desire to be associated with the best. My teachers at the undergraduate level exposed us to a lot of works by Ayoba Mboshe, Benelube, Niyo Shindare, and Adekunle Adeniro. In particular, there was no course taught in which Ayoba Mboshe's name was not mentioned. It instantly became my ambition to be taught by this great scholar with the belief that being taught by him could inspire me to also become a successful scholar. Luckily for me, my 1990-91 set was the last set of MA students he taught before he retired at the age of 60. Hence, I achieved my first goal of coming to Ibadan, and the rest is now history. Again, the search for an ideal academic destination led me to settle in Ibadan in 1996 as a university teacher rather than Abia State University, where I had a brief stint as an assistant lecturer. Unarguably, therefore, the University of Ibadan has successfully launched me to the Center of Global Sociolinguistic Scholarship. My story has been a fairy tale. When I was 10 years old, my father told me a story of how he was prevented from completing his secondary school education because of the untimely death of his mother. 3 days before my birth, a 90-year-old man came to my father and prophesied that his yet unborn child was a son. In addition, the old man told my father that his son was going to be so educated that he would be begged to stop reading. Sadly, the old man died a day after the prophecy and only a day before I was born. My parents naturally assumed it was a case of reincarnation and named me after the old man. And today, just like the old man prophesied, I have not stopped reading. Neither has anyone begged me to stop reading. It is perhaps the old man's prophecies that made my parents to ignore me when early in life I indicated interest in becoming a professional boxer, having watched some of the extraordinary displays of Muhammad Ali. Now, perspectives on language conflict. Conflict is a feature of all human societies and an integral aspect of all social relationships. According to Avro, 2002, conflict is competition by groups or individuals over incompatible goals, scarce resources, or the sources of power needed to acquire them. What easily comes to mind when we talk of conflicts is the very well-known social conflict, which is a much more established phrase than language conflict. While social conflict easily relates to several individuals, not yet. While social conflict easily relates to several individuals or groups in competition for limited resources and power, language conflict usually relates to language contact. This means that languages in contact do come into conflict. Contacts, especially prolonged ones, usually lead to tension, resentment, and disagreements. Conflicts erupt because differences between social groups tend to create feelings of threat, uncertainty of status, fear, and rivalry. Language conflict may then be said to exist when a social group is faced with a choice of languages to use, and when there is a disagreement among the members of the group about this choice. It is often argued that languages are neither individuals nor social groups that can be involved in conflicts. This argument clearly shows that it is groups or individuals that are in conflict over language choice or status rather than languages being in conflict. In other words, although languages are said to be in contact, it is the speakers of such languages who experience the conflict that results from language contact situation. It is the people who feel threatened or dominated and who really compete using their language as a mere instrument. The rivalry may be motivated by the quest for political or economic domination, but language is simply dragged in because of the sentiments that go with it. Different kinds of language conflicts exist in Nigeria. Conflicts among speakers of the major languages, conflicts between speakers of the major languages and minority languages, conflicts existing among speakers of different dialects of the same language, and then, of course, conflicts between indigenous Nigerian languages and English or Nigerian Pidgin. Other levels of language conflict are regularly experienced in different situations, namely educational contexts, places of worship, workplaces, markets, families, communities, streets, and so on. Causes of language conflict. Language conflict may be caused by competition, language survival, and differential language policies. Does language difference, grievance, or its combination with other factors lead to violence? Of course, the answer is yes, because we've got several instances where differences in language have resulted in volatile ethnic wars, as we witnessed in parts of China, Sri Lanka, Turkey, and so on. Yet, there are so many instances where religious, political, and economic factors have been the causes of conflict and not really language. Examples abound in Nigeria. The conflicts in the Niger Delta, in Kano, Kaduna, Jos, Boko Haram, and then the recent rampaging Fulani herdsmen. These are all related to social conflict and not language. An interesting case of language conflict of some sort exists in the use of languages on the Nigerian currency. Ajami, an Arabic script used in writing Hausa, was inscribed on the national currency. By 2004, when Professor Chukwuma Soludo became the central bank governor, he subtly changed from Arabic inscriptions to using the three major languages, namely Igbo and Hausa. But by 2009, when Mr. Lamido Sanusi came on board as the central bank governor, he quickly reverted to the use of Ajami. So what we found today on the national currency is Ajami inscription. There was an obvious discontent arising from the change in language regime adopted by each of these actors. But happily, this did not result in a full-blown social conflict. This kind of conflict exposes the inability of the national language policy to protect and promote indigenous Nigerian languages over some political and religious considerations. Thus, language conflict may have direct links with language politics. Individuals get involved in language politics for a number of reasons, similar reasons for which language conflict may also occur, including the fact that language is an instrument of identity at various levels. Those who control language also exert some control on the society. Language may be used as an instrument of exclusion and, of course, for ideological reasons. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, I have spent my over 25 years of teaching experience working on different kinds of language conflicts, including the Igbo language conflict, Igbo literature and the conflicts of language, the politics of English, the conflict of ideologies and the politics of language education, language planning and development conflicts, and terminology planning for health discourse. The Igbo language conflict. In the course of the development of Igbo, the language has been the focus of a number of crises and conflicts, which continue to be reflected in the attitudes of the people towards their language, in their perception of the adequacy or appropriateness of the language as a medium of literature and the mass media, in their appreciation of the language's relevance in modern education, and in their loyalty and love for their language. Owolaga 2001, who distinguishes between language internal conflict and language external conflict, blends Igbo language conflict on dialectal fragmentation and the Igbo orthography controversy. The first part of Igbo language conflict arose from the competition of the different dialects of the language for the position of standard Igbo. As with the cases of many West African languages, the Christian missionaries laid the foundation for the study of the Igbo language. However, for several reasons which may be blamed on the missionaries themselves, Igbo did not develop at the same pace as Hausa and Yoruba. Igboanusi 2006, therefore, investigated the roles played by Christian missionaries in the development of Igbo and found that the rivalry between various missionary groups might have resulted in the crises and conflicts that adversely affected the language, as well as attitudes towards it. In addition to the roles played by the missionaries and the orthography dispute, Igboanusi and Peter 2005 identified the Nigerian Civil War, which resulted in the split of Igbo into Igbo-like languages, as we find in parts of rivers and delta states, problems associated with attitudes towards the language, neglect by governments of Igbo-speaking states, and, of course, dialect politics, as some of the factors which affected the development of Igbo. Many of us are, for instance, familiar with the assertion of linguistic independence of languages within and around Port Harcourt, which have adopted the prefix R to change obvious Igbo names to sound and look differently. So today, instead of Umuokoro, we find Urumokoro. Instead of Imuigbo, we find Rumigbo, and so on. With respect to the exaggerated number of Igbo dialects, Igboanusi and Peter 2005 intervened by reclassifying Igbo dialects based on states where they are spoken. Thus, we have Abia, Imo, Anambra dialect, and so on. Although this approach does not claim that there is absolute uniformity in the dialect spoken in this sense, it appears to be the most practical and realistic description of Igbo varieties, because the Igbo today associate speakers of Igbo dialects with features common to their sets. A major regret in my contribution to the development of Igbo language has been my inability to cause important spelling reform of place names for Igbo, which has left the language with some wrong spellings, such as we find with the spellings of Oka, Olo, Oweri, Enugu, Nsukka, and so on. Now, Igbo literature and the conflicts of language. As it is with the case of language, Igbo literature is also caught in the conflict of language. In the discussion of Igbo literature, the influence of the oral tradition and the use of language have been issues of major concern. Consequently, Igboanusi 1995 defines Igbo literature as literature in the Igbo language and Igbo English. My contributions to Igbo literature have therefore reflected the two rules, namely Igbo and Igbo English, which are essentially the same, given that writers of Igbo, whether they write in Igbo language or in Igbo English, essentially strive to project Igbo culture and worldview to the outside world. A well-known Igbo proverb, perhaps popularized by Chinua Achebe, said that one does not watch a masquerade by standing in a particular position. I have heeded this advice by straddling both Igbo English literature and literature in Igbo language in order to explore the full potentials of Igbo literary tradition. The conflict of ideologies and the politics of language education. At a period when language policies are often at variance with practices and teachers and education supervisors are confused about the language policy in schools, the politics and conflicts in the choice of language of instruction in schools have occupied much of my academic endeavor with the aim of providing lasting solution to a major national challenge. It can be argued that education is the center of language politics, and reflecting on the politics of language, Shuhami notes, while language is dynamic, personal, free, and energetic, with no defined boundaries, there have always been those groups and individuals who want to control and manipulate it in order to promote political, social, economic, and personal ideologies. In educational context, language education policies are entirely about education and the ideological regulations of language. In order to achieve their ideological inclinations of education stakeholders, language education policies are often manipulated, maneuvered, and circumvented. For many parents who insist that access to social mobility and political power is associated with English language proficiency, the manipulation of language policy is to achieve economic ideology and protect the future of their children. Publishers, politicians, and practitioners of private schools promote language ideology, one that strongly links educational success with the English language. The national policy on education makes provision for initial literacy in the child's first language or the language of the immediate community at the pre-primary and junior primary levels. The policy goes ahead to make provisions for language at various levels of education. Of course, these are good educational policies, which sadly have been affected by politics and conflicts of ideologies. To determine the attitudes of students, teachers, parents, and administrators towards bilingual education, that is, education in the child's first language and English, Igboanusi 2008A carried out a large-scale survey The result demonstrated that the respondents preferred education in both English and their first language, and were not positively disposed to the use of only one language. It is felt that bilingual education would allow school children to be competent in both English and their Nigerian indigenous language. Yet, lack of political will has continued to undermine the full implementation of bilingual or multilingual education policies in the country. As can be seen, the policies of bilingual education in primary schools has had direct impact on the performances of students in secondary and tertiary levels of education. Now, despite the constitutional guarantees for bilingual or multilingual education in Nigeria, the policy is no longer being practiced in schools in southern Nigeria, as well as schools in part of northern minority areas. In other words, while Hausa is used as a medium of instruction to teach all subjects, sometimes including even English, in primary schools, particularly in north-western Nigeria, English-only medium instruction is practiced in schools in southern Nigeria and the northern linguistic minority areas. Against this backdrop, therefore, Igboanusi and Peter, 2016, investigated the micro-politics of language education by interrogating everyday language practices of education stakeholders, which are at variance with language in education policy. They found that considering the roles of political ethnicity, discriminatory citizenship, parents' high perception of English, and their seeming lack of interest in L1 medium instruction, only a language education policy that is uniformly practiced for all schools in Nigeria can restore mother tongue-based bilingual schooling in the country. The Igboanusi 2008B questioned the continued use of English as the sole medium of instruction in schools in Nigeria, given the fact that the need to learn English is often a barrier to education rather than opportunity for it. An interesting case here relates to one of my former students at the master's class who was denied employment to teach Igbo in a private school simply because her English was deeply influenced by the Igbo accent, precisely the alternation between re and le. Her interviewers could not, for instance, understand her when she said, "I like bread and rice for breakfast," when in fact she meant to say, "I like bread and rice for breakfast." As a result of some of the problems expressed above, some of my works recommend a reform of Nigeria's education system built on mother tongue-based bilingual education, given that it is now well established that when a child begins learning in his or her first language, that child is more likely to succeed academically and is better able to learn additional languages. Now, the politics of English. English language became institutionalized in Nigeria as a result of political interference, or if you like, as a result of colonization. The politics of English as a global language has further enhanced its dominance in Nigeria. Of course, the dominance of English in Nigeria is felt almost on every aspect of our national life. The interaction of the major varieties of English spoken in Nigeria, namely British English, American English, and Nigerian English, has preoccupied my efforts. Igboanusi 2003, for instance, reviews the extent of competition between American English and British English and predicts that with the ongoing flexibility in the use of either the American or British standards, as well as the attraction of Nigerians now towards America, American English will have equaled British English in terms of influence in several contexts, by the end of the 21st century. A major landmark in my contributions to Nigerian English was the publication of a dictionary of Nigerian English usage in 2002, revised in 2010. The extent of attention given to this dictionary by both Nigerian and non-Nigerian readers is an indication that Nigerian English will, in the next 50 years, become an acceptable standard, even for examinations and informal situations. Igboanusi 2006D uses the popular comedy of a Calabar man who ridicules an Ibadan man at a newspaper stand for pronouncing champion, that is champion newspaper, as champion, but ended up himself pronouncing it as yampion. To demonstrate the distinctiveness of Nigerian English pronunciation, Igboanusi 2006C investigates the syntactic features of Nigerian English and observes that the fact that some of the features of Nigerian English are shared by other varieties of world Englishes is a healthy development for the identity of non-native varieties of English around the world. Wolf and Igboanusi 2006 identify English as a language of power in Nigeria, given that English is the foremost language used by those in control of the society and in the corresponding public domains. Now, with the increasing spread of Hausa even beyond Nigeria and the ongoing globalization of Yoruba threatening the dominance of English in Nigeria, of course, the answer is no, at least not within the next 50 years. In general, therefore, my studies on Nigerian English have helped to define the identity of this variety of English. In particular, the documentation of Nigerian English usage in the form of a dictionary, the comparative analysis of the English accent of some ethnic groups in Nigeria, the detailed analysis of the lexical and syntactic innovation processes in Nigerian English, as well as the illustration of the challenges that face English in the education system, have further stimulated research in the documentation of this variety of English in particular, and other varieties of West African English in general. Now, language planning and development conflicts. Language planning is any activity that is aimed at effecting changes in language or language use. There are two major levels of language planning. We have macro level language planning, that is large-scale language planning usually undertaken by governments. And then we have micro level language planning, that is small-scale language planning usually undertaken by groups or individuals. Micro level planning can be referred to as an attempt by someone to modify the linguistic behavior of some community for some reason. It is no longer fashionable or even helpful to place every responsibility for change on the government. So, change begins with me. The time has come for a paradigm shift, a new practical approach that will see individuals initiating language planning processes and collaborating with policymakers towards achieving language reforms in different contexts. Consequently, my works on language planning have essentially focused on micro-language planning with a view to de-emphasizing the roles of government in language planning. The development conflict in West Africa prompted Igboanusi 2014 to investigate the role of micro-language planning in poverty alleviation in Nigeria in particular and West Africa in general. It argues that the fight against poverty alleviation in Nigeria can best succeed with well-coordinated micro-language planning activities, which are tailored towards job creation and literacy and disease elimination. In fact, with proper planning, language economies based on private and group initiatives could grow around indigenous languages and create jobs through teaching, translation, and interpreting, through publishing of books, creative works and newspapers, as well as acting of films in local languages, and of course, through the expansion of the church industry in the indigenous Nigerian languages. There is therefore a need for the development of the indigenous language capital in order to spread resources beyond the few Nigerians who are literate in English. Some of my works on Igbo language development through micro-language planning investigated the effects of internal migration on the Igbo language and the children of Igbo persons living outside of Igbo land. These studies found that although those sampled still demonstrated high sense of loyalty for Igbo, in reality, language shift to English and to a lesser extent Hausa and Yoruba is evident. To minimize the effects of migration on Igbo and sustain loyalty in the language, my studies encourage the practice of taking young persons to visit Igbo homeland on a regular basis, getting children into schools where Igbo is taught as a subject, and of course, compulsory use of the language in home domains. The development of minority languages has also attracted the attention of my scholarship. Some religious, political, and economic pressures are conniving to exterminate the minority languages in Nigeria. Given the socio-political variables in the country, the survival of minority languages will depend largely on a change of attitude by the speakers of these languages by using their languages in several domains. Similarly, Igboanusi 2008 explored the possibility of empowering Nigerian Pidgin and its speakers by raising the value of the language through status planning, especially in the education system. Unfortunately, a large majority of survey respondents did not favor the use of Nigerian Pidgin in education. Three major problems associated with the promotion of Nigerian Pidgin are: 1, lack of economic value; 2, perceived effects of Pidgin on the local languages; and 3, the effect of the use of Nigerian Pidgin on English language proficiency. To raise the value or profile of Nigerian Pidgin and draw attention to it, words of global importance should be translated into Nigerian Pidgin. The language should first be introduced as a school subject in areas where Nigerian Pidgin is popularly used before attempting to introduce it as a medium of instruction. Teaching Nigerian Pidgin as a subject will enable Nigerians to draw a line between Nigerian Pidgin and standard Nigerian English. The good news, however, is that in many urban and rural schools in Edo and parts of Delta States, teaching takes place in a combination of English and Nigerian Pidgin. Igboanusi and Puts 2008 highlight the roles of Nigerians in rejecting General Sani Abacha's imposition of French as Nigeria's second official language. The declaration of French as second official language in Nigeria might have been intended by the government of General Sani Abacha to counteract the US and UK-led isolationism. But Nigerians clearly understand the socio-political context of that policy and have allowed it to exist only in principle. Certainly, therefore, more micro-level involvement is needed to resolve several language issues in Nigeria and get language policies to be implemented. Now, terminology planning for health discourse. UNESCO 2005 describes terminology planning as an endeavor that consciously and systematically develops special language according to the needs and requirements of domain communication. Terminology planning is an aspect of language planning which aims at improving communication in specific domain of language, such as medicine, agriculture, science and technology, and so on. Apart from its ability to encourage bottom-top initiatives, my attraction towards terminology planning is essentially because of my strong conviction that development, particularly in the health, education, and economic sectors, is mostly possible in the language that people understand best. There are many domains which lack terminology in indigenous Nigerian languages, but since health is a fundamental aspect of development, we began with the medical domain, and particularly with HIV, AIDS, and Ebola discourses. In recognition of the role of language in the prevention and management of diseases, I have, together with a team of medical and language experts, been working on a meta-language for HIV, AIDS, and Ebola discourses in Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. So far, I'm glad to report that this project has resulted in 3 important books, which will be available to the public by the end of April 2017, namely English Hausa Glossary of HIV, AIDS, and Ebola-related terms, edited by Ahmed Amfani and Garba Ibrahim. English Igbo Glossary of HIV, AIDS, and Ebola-related terms, edited by Herbert Igboanusi and Boniface Mba. And English Yoruba Glossary of HIV, AIDS, and Ebola-related terms, edited by Lukman Ayodele Yusuf, Adedotu Adetunji, and Clement Odoje, all published by the University Press, PLC. We have been able to modernize the nomenclatures of HIV and AIDS with the aim of eliminating stigmatization and discrimination of persons living with HIV and AIDS. For example, we chose Orin Chekwa Ahom, or ONA. That is something that fights or weakens the body immunity for HIV in Igbo. And Mewu, a condition that causes emaciation for AIDS. In Yoruba, we agreed on Kokoro Apasojara, or Kasa, or Kasa for short, meaning that which kills the body immunity for HIV, and Arun Isodele Ajasara, a sickness that completely weakens body immune system. Yeah, that is for S. In Hausa, Karya Gakuwa, meaning that which weakens the body immune system, was chosen for HIV, and Kanjamua, capable of emaciating one's body, was chosen for S. Since it is now more acceptable to refer to certain persons as commercial sex workers rather than prostitutes, we agreed for Ndinkwari, that is people who hang around for commercial sex workers in Igbo. Belepawo, women women who stay at home making money in Yoruba, and Mata Damazla, that is women who are living independently in Hausa. In a related study, Igboanusi, Odoje, and Ibrahim 2016 translated Ebola-associated terms into Nigeria's 3 major languages, namely Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, with a view to making information on Ebola accessible to the grassroots population. In view of so much work to be done to create terminology in various domains of needs, and in keeping to my belief in micro-language planning, I wish to invite linguists and other interested individuals to form terminology planning associations for Nigerian languages. It is essentially through this effort that we can provide technical and scientific terminology for different domains in different Nigerian languages. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, I've tried to explore the opportunities available in sociolinguistics to resolve the conflicts and politics of language development. whether applied to literature or to language, it is amazing to acknowledge the flexibility of sociolinguistics. I really wonder if there's any other social or human science field that enables one the flexibility to relate with any subject, medicine, law, education, security, economics, and so on. I have maximally taken advantage of this flexibility and applied my skills in sociolinguistics to interrogate educational, political, economic, literary, linguistic, and medical issues. My story is a very modest achievement, at least by my own standards. A well-known anecdote in the Igbo worldview narrates the story of a lizard which fell down from a tree, looked either ways, and beat his chest, saying, "If no one else praises me, I'll praise myself." Success stories are incomplete without reference to those who have made such achievements possible. First and foremost, I'm eternally grateful to God Almighty for his uncountable blessings, and particularly for rescuing me from the point of death on February 1, 2015, after a bus in which I was traveling somersaulted about 12 times following a front tire burst. My story would not have been possible without the magnanimity of my parents, Chief Emmanuel Igboanusi and Mrs. Roslyn Igboanusi, who sacrificed their comfort for my education. To their spirits, I therefore dedicate this lecture. I'm most grateful to Professor Adekunle Adeniro, who supervised my master's project and PhD thesis. It was he who initiated me into the field of studies called sociolinguistics and developed in me the confidence, the perseverance, and the diligence which have helped me to leave a mark in the field. Thank you, Prof, for teaching me the virtues of humility and modesty. In 2007, when I had some conflict with some friends in my department over an academic opportunity at the University of Hong Kong, 6 exceptionally nice persons intervened to save my career. They are Professor Emeritus Ayo Bamboshe, the West African linguistic guru, Professor Adigu Abaje, then the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, Professor Idowu Olayenka, now the Vice Chancellor of University of Ibadan, Professor Stanley Okafor, Professor Emeritus Ben Elube, and Professor Kola Owolabi. The action of these 6 Nigerians has motivated me to always show kindness to people around me. For the same cause, Professor Oye Taiwo and Dr. Jacob Oludare Oluwadoro, 2 exemplary men of God, risked their careers for my sake. I can never forget their roles in my life. I acknowledge the support of my uncles, my siblings, my cousins, particularly Onye Igboanusi and Silvanus Ezigbo, who are here, my in-laws, particularly Bridget Duru, who is here. The following family friends have been wonderful. They are Dr. and Mrs. Aziko here, Professor and Mrs. Niyo Kuye, Professor Nkiru Meludu, Professor and Mrs. Ayo Kende, Professor and Mrs. Udo Wokoja, Mr. and Mrs. Paul Abindo, Professor Steve Ufaro, Dr. and Mrs. Greg Obiamalo, Engineer and Mrs. Eugene Oma, Professor and Mrs. Remi Oriako, Pastor and Mrs. Emeka Nahiwe, Dr. and Mrs. Nnamdi Jibri, Dr. and Mrs. Lambert Inhebuzo, Professor and Mrs. Obododi Moha, Mr. Hilary Alilono, and Mr. Fidelis Akamere. My special appreciation goes to my former teachers, particularly Professors Niyo Shundare, eminently qualified for the Nobel Prize for Literature. Dr. Mother Angela Walaka, who brought me to the department as a lecturer too. Leko Oyeleye, the most kind-hearted teacher. Aduke Adebayo, known for her fairness and firmness. Dayo Shola, Danis Debaye, Augusta Omamo, MC Onokawa, Omen Maduka Durunze, the physicist turned linguist. P.A. Eziko Chiaku, Dr. E.O. Olukoji, who facilitated my admission for the master's degree program, and Emeritus Professor Abiola Odejide. I sincerely thank the amiable and hugely popular Dean of Arts, Professor Adebola Akola, for the opportunity to present this inaugural lecture at this time. My career was boosted by my collaboration with these three exceptionally benevolent individuals: Professor Hans George Wolf, Dr. Lothar Peter, and Professor Martin Puss. I cannot thank them enough for their positive interventions in my life. I similarly appreciate my collaboration with such great scholars as Joseph Schmidt, Peter Luku, Brigitte Reinecke, Richard Taylor, Toko Omoniyi, Augustine Simobobda, and Adams Botomo. Special appreciation goes to Professor Domingo Kore and all members of Otumuna for their brotherly fraternity. My department has provided a friendly and peaceful environment necessary for me to excel. I therefore thank my head of department, Professor Arimpe Adejumo, for demonstrating exemplary leadership in the department. I thankfully acknowledge the roles of my other colleagues listed here. Within the faculty, I have enjoyed rewarding companionship of so many persons, some of whom have been listed here. I thankfully acknowledge colleagues from other universities, particularly those who have been able to attend this inaugural lecture. I saw Professor Yekasai from Utmandan Fodio University, Sokoto. He's here with us. Dr. Satatima and some of his colleagues have come all the way from BUK Kano for this lecture. Mr. Jita has come from Zaria to attend this lecture. Dr. Greg Obiamalo has come from Unizik, Oka. A very powerful delegation from LASU, led by Professor Harrison Adeniyi, the president of Linguistics Association of Nigeria, and Professor Leko Fakoya, now the dean of the Faculty of Arts. They are here. We also have a powerful delegation from University of Benin, led by the former head of department of linguistics, and that is Dr. Mrs. Omoregbe. Yeah, I thank other colleagues from OAU. The team from OAU is led by the head of department of English, Professor Niyi Okuye. I thank many colleagues, many nice colleagues from Unilag, from UniOsho, from Ajayi Crowther University, and so many other universities who have come to witness this presentation. Many organizations and institutions have been instrumental to my success story. My most profound gratitude goes to the University of Ibadan for generously approving several periods of accumulated leave and paid sabbaticals, which enabled me to concentrate on research, as well as for the Senate Research Grant awarded me in 2000, 2003, and 2007. I deeply appreciate the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Fritz Thyssen Foundation, Institute of French Research in Africa, IFRA, Nigerian Academy of Letters, Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences, NIAS, Heinrich Boll Foundation, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TED Fund, Abia State University, and University of Hong Kong for immense research support. I thank all my students, past and present, for their loyalty, resourcefulness, and friendship. They willingly served as research assistants, field workers, and family friends. In particular, let me acknowledge Dr. Makaide, Dr. Bolanle Shogunro, Dr. Gerard Wabo, Dr. Patience Solomon Etafia, Mrs. Esa Senayo, Violet Evairo, Peter Ihuna, Tayo Babatola, and Mrs. Yeserenike Olosho. I wish to express my most sincere gratitude to the very Reverend T.O. Olatunji, former chaplain, Chapel of the Resurrection, and very Reverend O.K. Oyelade, the current chaplain, Chapel of the Resurrection, for their prayers and love. Finally, I am especially grateful for the 5 most important people in my life today. My beautiful and highly supportive wife, Ijoma, and my children, Cindy, Chisom, Ogochukwu, and Chidubem. My family has always provided me with the unparalleled affection and the stability to work maximally, leisurely, and fruitfully. Thank you very much for listening.